Go further with the American Express Business Gold Card. Earn 3 times membership rewards points on flights and prepaid hotels when you book through AmexTravel.com. Whether your destination is a business conference or a client meeting, your purchases will help you earn more points for future trips. Experience more on your travels with Amex Business Gold. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-gold. Amex Business Gold Card. Built for business by American Express.
Welcome to This Feels Familiar. I'm your host, Minaa B. I'm a therapist, author, and creator of the siblinghood theory. And this show explores the themes of belonging, conflict, and the relational patterns shaping your life. So let's dive in. We've all heard about eldest daughter syndrome. That is the eldest daughter who becomes the third parent in the household, the one who's responsible for her younger siblings, who mediates conflict, who takes care of everyone's emotional needs. But here is what gets missed. The eldest daughter isn't always the one who's parentified. Sometimes it's the middle child. Sometimes it's even the youngest. And those middle and younger children who were forced to be mini adults in their homes, who carried responsibilities that were burdensome in their younger years and damaging as adults, well, I do believe that they deserve to have their experience named too. So if you were the middle or younger child who became the functional eldest child, this episode is for you because your experience matters. Your burdens you carried were real, and the ways it shaped your sibling relationships deserve to be understood too. Now, if you are the eldest in your family system, I also want you to pay attention because sometimes parentification can happen to multiple siblings in a home. So before we dive in, please subscribe to the show so that you do not miss an episode moving forward. Now, let's start with the definition of parentification. Parentification is when a child is forced to take on adult responsibilities that should be handled by a parent. It's when the roles get reversed. So the child becomes the caretaker and the parent abdicates their responsibility. There are 2 types of parentification. So the first one is instrumental, which is practical. It's when the child is responsible for cooking meals, managing household tasks, taking care of their siblings' physical needs, or even doing things like paying bills and making sure everyone gets to school on time. They're basically running the household because the parent isn't. The next form of parentification I feel is often more popularly known, and that's emotional parentification. It's the child who becomes their parent's emotional support system, their confidant, their therapist. They're also the child who manages their parents' feelings, mediates family conflict, keeps the peace, absorbs everyone's stress, and they're the emotional caretaker of the family. So yes, they might be taking care of their parents emotionally, but they're also taking care of their siblings emotionally since their parents are neglecting the emotional needs of their siblings. Now, often parentified children experience both types. They're cooking dinner for their younger siblings while also managing their parents' emotional breakdowns. They're making sure homework gets done while also being told secrets and problems that children really should not have to hear or carry. And here's what's critical. Parentification doesn't just damage the child's relationship with their parent, it fundamentally distorts their relationship with their siblings because you can't be both. You can't be both a sibling and a parent to the same person. Those roles are incompatible. When you're parentified, your siblings see you as an authority figure, not a peer. And they can resent you for having power over them. They can't confide in you the way siblings should because you're the one enforcing rules, managing their behavior, and sometimes reporting back to the parent. So the equality that should exist between siblings is gone. Now, why does this happen to children who aren't actually the oldest, right? Because birth order theory will have us thinking that it's always going to be the firstborn child who has to carry the burdens of the family and is more at risk of becoming the parentified child. But I'm going to share with you 5 common reasons the middle or younger child ends up carrying the burden of being the functional eldest child. The first one is gender. Daughters get parentified regardless of birth order. In many families, gender matters more than birth order. If the eldest child is a boy and there's a daughter further down the line, the daughter often becomes the parentified one. Not because she's older, not because she's more capable, but simply because of her gender. She's female, and the cultural script says that girls take care of people. And even across family structures, daughters are expected to be nurturing, responsible, and emotionally attuned. So even if there's an older brother, the younger sister becomes the one managing the household, taking care of younger siblings, and absorbing the family's emotional chaos. She's the one making dinner, doing the emotional labor of keeping everyone calm. She's the one her parents confides in about adult problems. And meanwhile, her older brother is allowed to just be a kid. Or even when he's an adult, he's still not expected to carry the same responsibility. This creates a particular kind of resentment in sibling relationships because the parentified younger daughter resents her older brother for getting to opt out of responsibilities she was never allowed to turn down. And the older brother often doesn't even see the inequity because it was always normalized in the family. So he grew up in a family system that taught him women tend to domestic and emotional labor where men focus on other things. So he doesn't even realize there's a discrepancy in caretaking. Now, there's something else I want to name though, because boys get parentified too. And when they do, it often happens for specific reasons. For example, the eldest son might be parentified when there's no father in the home and he becomes the man of the house. He's told he has to step up, take care of his mother, protect his siblings, and he's given a role that's way too big for him and it robs him of his childhood. Or the younger son becomes parentified when the eldest daughter can't or won't take on the role. Maybe the eldest daughter has a disability or she pushed back against the family's expectations or she left home early. So the responsibility shifts to a younger son and he becomes the emotional or practical caretaker. Now, this can also happen in blended families where, for example, let's say a firstborn daughter, her parents split up and her dad has another child in a family system and that child is a boy. So in that family system, that boy is the eldest child. However, he does have an older sister who lives in a different family environment than he does. So when they're not together, because he is the eldest son, he might take on certain responsibilities. But when his older sister is visiting the home, she might pick up her caretaking duties when she's in the home. So the point of this is understanding that when boys are parentified, they often carry it differently than girls. They might not be expected to do the emotional labor, the listening, the nurturing, the peacekeeping, or providing the domestic support that the home needs. However, they are still carrying something because they're expected to be providers, protectors, and even problem solvers. They're told that they have to be strong, handle things without crying, not show vulnerability, and ultimately not tap into their emotions. And that creates its own set of burdens that show up in their sibling relationships and their adult lives. Now, here is the second thing that's often overlooked. Temperament and personality can shape how parentification happens in a home. Sometimes parentification has nothing to do with birth order or gender. It has to do with which child seems more capable, more responsible, most emotionally mature, and sometimes that can be a middle or younger child. Parents might look at their eldest and see them as irresponsible, difficult to be in a relationship with, too emotional, or not trustworthy. So maybe the eldest pushes back, they ask too many questions, they don't follow rules, and that makes the parent frustrated. Maybe they're struggling in school, or they're just going through a really rebellious phase, and the parent labels them the scapegoat. They become the problem child and the one who can't be relied on or trusted. Now, let's say the middle child is compliant, is emotionally attuned, and eager to please. They're the one who does well in school, who follows directions, who tries to keep the peace. The parent might look at them and say, you know what? You are more capable than your big brother. You are more responsible than your older sister. And so I am going to expect you to take on certain responsibilities. And this is how the middle child becomes a functional eldest child. They're the one managing younger siblings, they're the one the parent confides in. They're the one who's told you're so mature for your age, you're the responsible one in this family. And sometimes that middle child can start off feeling very proud of this at first. They might feel special, they may feel chosen, but what they don't realize is that they've been given a burden that's really impacting their childhood. They've been assigned a role that's robbing them of an ability to simply be a kid. And this can create deep resentment between the parentified middle child and, for example, the scapegoated eldest child. The middle child might resent the eldest for not stepping up and not being compliant and for being difficult and for being irresponsible and really be upset about that. And the eldest can resent the middle child for being the favorite, for making them look bad by comparison, and for being an extension of the parent's authority. Neither sibling chose these roles, but the roles shape their entire relationship. Now, the third thing is also something that's important to understand when it comes to how middle and younger children can become the functional eldest child. The eldest child is unavailable either due to disability or mental illness. Sometimes the eldest child simply cannot fulfill the role because they're dealing with their own significant challenges. Maybe they have a disability that requires extra care and attention. Maybe they're showing early signs of mental illness, such as depression, anxiety, and other behavioral issues, and the family is focused on managing that. In these cases, the burden shifts to the next child in line. The middle or younger child becomes the functional eldest, not because they're more capable in general, but because the actual eldest is unable to fulfill whatever responsibilities the parent would want them to fulfill. So therefore, the next child in line is who steps into the gap. And here's what makes this particularly complicated. Sometimes the middle or younger child can start to resent the eldest sibling. And they also may start to feel guilt about the fact that they resent their eldest sibling. They may think, I know my sibling has real challenges. I know I should be understanding, but I am also deeply angry that I have to carry this responsibility. Because even though they understand intellectually that their sibling needs support, they're still a child who didn't ask to be the caretaker. They're still carrying a burden that shouldn't be theirs. And they're still losing their childhood to manage things that should be managed by adults. This also creates a specific dynamic where the parentified child feels protective of the eldest while simultaneously resenting them. They defend their siblings to others because they love their sibling. They want to protect their sibling, and they recognize that their sibling is struggling with something that is really hard to cope with. But underneath that, there's also a sense of anger because they're born into a family system where they've already had to engage in caretaking, and they feel like they're carrying a responsibility that only adults really should be carrying. The next thing is birth spacing. And this is when the middle child is closer in age to the younger siblings, while the eldest child might be significantly older than their other siblings. So, simply put, sometimes parentification can happen because of age gaps. If there's a large age gap between the eldest and the middle child, let's say it's over 6 years, but the middle child is only a year or two older than the younger siblings, the middle child is naturally going to become the caretaker. The eldest is off doing their own thing. Maybe they're in high school when the middle child is born. And ultimately, because of the age difference, they're developmentally in a different stage. So the middle child ends up being the one who's around all the time, who's available, and who's embedded in the younger sibling's daily life. Parents can see this and take advantage of it. They may think, well, you're playing well together anyway. You can watch them. You can help them with their homework. And you can just always make sure that your younger sibling is okay. So what starts as occasional help becomes permanent responsibility. The middle child becomes the built-in babysitter or the homework helper, not because they're the oldest, but because they're close enough in age to be accessible, but old enough to be useful. Now, this can create a sense of resentment toward the eldest sibling who got to opt out simply because of their age. The middle child might think, you're the oldest, so why aren't you doing this? But they may also fail to realize the distance between their developmental stage. And they may fail to realize that despite having an older sibling, their older sibling is living their own life and tending to their own responsibilities. So it can create a very complicated dynamic, not only toward the eldest, but also sometimes toward the youngest, because now you're stuck taking care of the younger sibling. Now, I want to talk about how parentification can actually happen in adulthood. So this is the fifth reason why middle and younger children can become parentified. Sometimes it's due to a family crisis. Sometimes parentification doesn't start in childhood. Sometimes it happens later when a family crisis hits and roles suddenly have to shift. A parent gets sick. A divorce happens. A parent develops a substance abuse problem or there's a mental health crisis. The family structure that existed before collapses and everyone has to adapt. So in these moments, the eldest might rebel or withdraw. They might say, I have children, or I'm married, or I have a demanding job, and I am not going to step into the role of being a caretaker. So the responsibility falls to a younger sibling who is either more willing to do the work, more available, especially if they are the sibling that's still living in the home environment with their parents while all the other siblings have already moved out. Another way I see this happen is if the younger sibling is the one who isn't married or doesn't have kids. In many ways, all of the responsibility just really ends up falling into their lap, where they now have to function as if they are the eldest because nobody else wants to do it. And once that younger sibling steps up during a crisis, they often get locked into the role permanently. So even after the crisis passes, they're still the one everyone is calling. They're still the one managing family dynamics, checking in on the parent, making sure other siblings are okay. And this is particularly painful because it happens at a stage of life when siblings should be equalizing. When you're all adults, this is a beautiful opportunity to be peers and engage in adult-like activities without the guidance of your parents, or even without your parents infringing on the things that you want to do as siblings because you're an adult now. But parentification in adulthood creates the same hierarchy it does in childhood. One sibling is still carrying disproportionate responsibility, and the others are still dependent or disconnected.
K-pop Demon Hunters Haja Boys breakfast meal and Huntrix meal have just dropped at McDonald's. They're calling this a battle for the fans. What do you say to that, Rumi?
It's not a battle. So glad the Saja Boys could take breakfast and give our meal the rest of the day.
It is an honor to share.
No, it's our honor.
It is our larger honor.
No, really. Stop.
You can really feel the respect in this battle. Pick a meal to pick a side.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
At participating McDonald's while supplies last.
All right, ladies.
When you've done the work, you want your hydration to do the same. Introducing new Gatorade Lower Sugar, now with no artificial flavors, sweeteners, or colors. And 75% less sugar and all the electrolytes of regular Gatorade, now available nationwide.
The sibling who stepped up resents the others for not helping. The others might not even realize how much that sibling is doing, or they might feel judged for not doing more. And the family dynamic stays stuck in a pattern where one person is the functional parent and the others are still operating as children. Now let's talk about how these roles impact sibling relationships. Because when a middle or younger child becomes the functional eldest child, it fundamentally distorts their relationship with their siblings. The first thing that happens is that it creates resentment in the relationship. The parentified middle or younger child resents their siblings for getting to just be kids while they had to grow up too fast. They resent the eldest for not stepping up, for being protected or excused from responsibility. They resent the younger siblings for needing so much care that stole their own childhood. And their siblings can resent them too. The eldest resents being seen as inadequate or as the one who failed to fulfill the role. The younger siblings resent being controlled, managed, or parented by someone who's supposed to be their peer. Nobody asked for these roles, but everyone's angry about them. So that familiar feeling of resentment toward your siblings that you can't quite articulate, that sense that they got something you didn't, or that they're judging you for not being what they needed, that often comes from parentification. The roles were assigned unfairly and everyone's carrying anger about it. The second thing that happens is that it makes true sibling connection difficult. You can't be both a parent and a sibling to the same person. Those roles are fundamentally incompatible. When you're the functional eldest, you're not experiencing your siblings as equals. You're experiencing them as your responsibility. Therefore, you can't confide in them. You can't be vulnerable with them. You can't ask them for support because you're the one who's supposed to be strong, stable, and the one holding it together. And they can't see you as a peer because you've always been the one in charge and you've always been the one to have more power than they do. This can create a particular kind of loneliness because you're surrounded by siblings, but you may feel like you can't truly connect with them. You're isolated in your role, carrying burdens alone, and never able to just be a sibling alongside them. The next thing that it does is that parentification creates role rigidity that's hard to break. Man, I see this in my practice all the time as a therapist. Even as adults, the parentified sibling often stays stuck in that role. They're still the one everyone calls when there's a problem. They're still managing family dynamics, checking in on everybody, making sure things are okay. They're still expected to be the responsible one, the strong one, and the one who has it together. And their siblings are still stuck in their roles too. The eldest who is seen as irresponsible might still feel inadequate or defensive. The younger siblings who were cared for might still be very dependent and expect to be managed, even though they're adults. Nobody knows how to relate to each other outside these roles because these roles have defined the relationship for so long. And trying to break out of them feels disorienting, even threatening, because you recognize that the whole family structure might collapse when you decide you don't want to be the functional eldest anymore. You just want to be you. Lastly, it stills the ability to just be siblings. The reality is, when you have a sibling relationship, that is your first peer. You don't want to feel like you are responsible for your peer to the extent that it robs you of your ability to be yourself and have fun and tap into your own needs and desires. That is how resentment builds in sibling relationships, and that is how a lack of reciprocity builds up in sibling relationships. And so the most painful part of parentification is that it simply robs you of the chance to just be a sibling, to play together without one being in charge, to share secrets with one without the other one being responsible, or the fear that this other person might condemn me because I looked up to them as a parent, even though they're only a year older than me. You're just my sibling. And so that familiar feeling of wishing your sibling could be different, easier, or more equal, that's often the grief of what parentification stole. the relationship you should have had but never got to experience. So I'm going to give a quick pause here. If this episode is resonating with you, please subscribe to this show and please remember to leave a 5-star review when you're done listening. It can help build sibling cohesion. And so maybe you want to share this episode with your sibling if you were the functional eldest child, or if you recognize that another sibling in your home was the functional eldest child. Maybe this is your way of letting them know you see them and you hear them and you understand what they were going through. So now let's jump back in. And I want to give you some strategies on what you can do with all of this information. How do you move forward when parentification shaped your sibling relationship? So the first thing that you need to do is name what happened. Start by naming it clearly. I was parentified. I was given responsibilities that shouldn't have been mine. That wasn't my fault, and it damaged my relationship with my siblings. Naming it gives you language for something you might have felt your whole life but couldn't articulate. Because sometimes we don't realize, oh, this is a role dynamic that's actually impacting the relationship that I have with my sibling. I also want you to grieve what you lost. Give yourself permission to grieve your childhood. Grieve the carefree years you didn't get. Grieve the sibling relationships you should have had but couldn't because you were too busy being a parent. Because that grief is real and valid. And when you pay attention to that grief, it makes more space for intimacy in your sibling relationships. The next thing that you need to do is start setting boundaries. If you're still stuck in the functional eldest role as an adult, you can stop being the one everyone relies on. And the only way to do that is to ask yourself, what boundaries do I need to set? Okay, because what happens as we are in these roles for a very long time, we engage in role rigidity. We experience role rigidity where we become so rigid and stuck in that role, we forget that we can opt out of it. But the only way to opt out of the role is to start setting boundaries. I'm not able to pick you up this weekend. I cannot loan you any more money. I'm not going to be able to help with mom and dad this weekend. I'm going to need one of you to step up. That is what it looks like to set boundaries and start exerting the desires and the needs that you have. Okay, so that's one of the things that you really, really have to do when it comes to repositioning the role that you have in your family. You really have to get comfortable with helping people understand that you don't want to be in this role anymore, but the only person who can enforce that is you. I also think it's really important to talk to your siblings about it. If you want to repair your sibling relationships, consider talking to them about the roles that you all played, especially as the functional eldest child. It's not to blame them, but you can name the dynamic that you feel is shaping your relationship. You might say, I was put in a parental role with you when we were kids, and I think that created distance between us. Do you feel the same way as me? Ask them. Acknowledge the role that you played, but also be open and curious to hear how they felt about that role. So if you feel like you would like to have a closer bond with your sibling, it's okay to recognize that being the parentified child put a sense of power in your hands that your sibling didn't have, and that could have caused some ruptures. So talk about it and name the experience. Next, I want you to see if your siblings can meet you as equals. The test of whether the relationship can change is whether your siblings can start seeing you as an equal and as a peer. Can they support you when you need support? Can they stop expecting you to always be the strong one? Can they take responsibility for themselves? If they can, there's potential for a new kind of relationship. But if they can't, if they still expect you to be the parent, even after you have expressed to them how this role dynamic makes you feel, how burdensome it is, how it leaves you very burnt out, if they still push for you to be in that role anyway, you might need to accept that the relationship may stay limited. And that is going to have to require you to also figure out what boundaries you need to put in place, while also honoring that this is as far as the relationship may go until they finally accept that I no longer want to function in this role. Instead, I want to function as a peer. The next thing that you need to do is stop carrying responsibility for your siblings' lives. Now, this is hard, but it is critical for your own journey and self-development. Your siblings' problems are not yours to solve. Their mental health is not your responsibility. You can have compassion and empathy for someone's mental health without feeling like you are responsible for managing their mental health. Their life choices, again, are not yours to manage. You can care about your sibling without carrying them. So practice saying this to them when they vent to you, or when they open up and they share things to you that makes it clear that they probably want you to intervene on their behalf without doing the work. Practice this. I hear that's hard. What are you going to do about it? Instead of immediately jumping into fix, ask them, what are you going to do about it? What do you have planned? Everything that you shared with me sounds really, really difficult, and I'm curious to know, what are the plans that you have in place so far? What are the things that you are going to do about it to maybe manage XYZ issue? Start letting your sibling recognize that they are responsible for themselves too, but also help them see that you are no longer going to be the person who jumps in to fix everything just because you have the role of being the functional eldest child in the home. I also encourage you to build relationships where you can be the one who needs support. One of the hardest parts of being parentified is that you never learned how to receive care. You were always the one giving it. So practice building relationships where you're allowed to be vulnerable and where you can need support and not feel guilty about it, because you know the people in your life want to take care of you. They don't want to see you struggle, and they want to support you. Lastly, I want you to recognize when distance might be healthy for a relationship, because sometimes your siblings just can't see you outside of the parentified role. So if they expect you to manage their lives or solve their problems or carry emotional responsibility for them, and they're not willing to change that dynamic, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to cut them completely out your life. But is that the sibling that you want to go to have brunch with? Maybe not. Maybe that's the sibling that you spend time with them when your parents are having Sunday dinner. But I think it's okay to recognize that you can adjust the degree of closeness in your relationships when people are expecting you to show up a particular way that lacks reciprocity in the sibling relationship. So here's what I want you to take from this episode. If you were the middle or younger child who became the functional eldest, your experience is valid. You carried a burden that shouldn't have been yours. You lost parts of your childhood to responsibilities that should have been handled by adults, and that shaped your sibling relationships in ways that were painful and limiting. You didn't choose that role. You didn't fail by being unable to do it perfectly. You were a child who was given too much, too soon, and you did the best you could. However, I want you to know that you can retire from that role right now. You can set boundaries, you can stop carrying responsibility for your siblings' lives, and you can grieve what you lost and build relationships where you're allowed to be an equal, to be vulnerable, to receive care instead of always giving it. Your siblings might understand, or they might not. They might be willing to build something new with you, or they might want you to stay in a role that's familiar. Either way, you get to decide what you're willing to carry moving forward. So if you were the functional eldest, you don't have to be that anymore. So if this episode resonated with you, please rate and subscribe to my show. I also encourage you to subscribe to my newsletter, All the Hard Things. It is a weekly newsletter that goes live on Substack. And please grab a copy of my book, Owning Our Struggles, if you want to continue learning from me. Now, here's what I really want you to remember. Being parentified as a middle or younger child robbed you of your childhood and distorted your sibling relationships. That wasn't your fault. You carried burdens that were never meant to be yours. And you're allowed to retire from that role now, to set boundaries, to grieve what you lost, and to build relationships where you can just finally be an equal with your sibling. Until next time.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.